The twin suns of Kethra blazed overhead like angry eyes, turning the desert sand into a burning sea that stretched beyond the horizon. Deep beneath the surface, in tunnels carved from rock and desperation, human voices echoed through the darkness. "Move! Faster, humans! The quota must be met before the sun set." Commander Thex's voice boomed through the mining shafts, his scaled hide glistening with moisture that his advanced cooling suit provided. The Velari officer stood nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian features twisted in permanent disgust. As he watched the small human form scurrying through the tunnels below, in the deepest shaft, Hannah wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand. The metal tool in her grip should have been scorching hot after hours of use, but somehow it felt comfortable against her palm. She swung the heavy pickaxe again, breaking another chunk of precious crystal from the tunnel wall. The blue-green. Stones were worth more than a human life to the Velari Empire, or so Commander Thex reminded them daily. "Hannah, take a break," her brother Kyung called from across the narrow tunnel. His face was red with heat exhaustion, and his breathing came in short gasps. "You have been working for 6 hours without stopping." Hannah shook her head and continued her steady rhythm. She never seemed to tire like the others. While her fellow workers collapsed from the brutal heat that could reach 50 degrees in the deeper tunnels, she worked on with quiet determination. The other humans had learned not to question this strange endurance of hers. "Leave her alone, Kyung," said Tae, their shift leader. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s who had been mining on Kethra for over a decade. "Your sister knows her limits better than anyone." Kyung frowned but said nothing more. He had noticed things about Hannah over the years, small things that did not make sense. The way water seemed to last longer when she carried the rations. How the oppressive heat felt less crushing when she worked nearby. How metal tools stayed cool in her hands while burning everyone else, but Hannah never spoke of these things. And Kyung had learned not to ask. At the far end of the tunnel, young Minho struggled with a stubborn section of wall. The 20-year-old had only been on Kethra for 6 months, and the harsh conditions were still breaking him down day by day. Sweat poured down his face as he raised his pickaxe, but his arms shook with exhaustion. "I cannot do this anymore," Minho whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of metal. Striking stone throughout the tunnel system. Hannah glanced up from her work and saw Minho swaying on his feet. Without a word, she set down her tool and walked over to him. The other workers barely noticed as she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Rest for a moment," she said softly. "I will help with this section." As her fingers touched his sweat-soaked shirt, Minho felt an immediate relief from the crushing heat. It was as if a cool breeze had suddenly filled the stifling tunnel. He looked at Hannah with surprise, but she had already turned her attention to the wall, her pickaxe moving with smooth, powerful strokes. Above them, Lieutenant Voss descended into the tunnel system, his boots clanking on the metal ladder. The Velari was smaller than Commander Thex, but no less cruel. His yellow eyes scanned the working humans with the cold calculation of someone counting livestock. "Production is down 3% from yesterday," Voss announced to Tae. "Commander Thex is not pleased." Tae wiped his hands on his work clothes and tried to stand straighter despite his exhaustion. "The heat has been worse than usual, sir. Some of the workers are struggling." "Then they will work harder or face reduced rations," Voss replied. His gaze moved across the humans until it settled on Hannah. "What about that one? She seems different." Hannah continued working, her movements steady and controlled. She did not look up as the alien officer studied her, but she could feel his attention like a weight on her shoulders. "Hannah," Tae said carefully. "She's one of our most consistent workers, never causes trouble, always meets her quota." "Exactly," Voss said, his voice carrying a note of suspicion. "Too consistent. Most humans break down after a few years in these conditions. How long has she been here?" 7 years, Tae answered truthfully. Voss's scaled brow ridge rose slightly. 7 years was nearly unheard of for human workers in the deep tunnels. Most were transferred to easier surface duties after 3 or 4 years if they survived that long. "Interesting," the lieutenant murmured. "Keep watching that one. Report anything unusual." As Voss climbed back toward the surface, the workers slowly returned to their normal rhythm. But Minho stayed close to Hannah, still feeling the strange comfort her presence brought. He wanted to ask her about it, but something in her quiet manner warned him not to speak. Hours passed, and the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon. The temperature in the tunnels should have been rising as the day's heat penetrated deeper underground, but somehow the air around Hannah's work area remained bearable. Then disaster struck. A deep rumble shook the tunnel walls, and chunks of rock began raining down from the ceiling. The support beams groaned under sudden pressure as a section of the tunnel started to collapse. "Cave in!" Tay shouted. "Everyone out!" Workers scrambled toward the main shaft, but Minho was trapped on the wrong side of the falling rocks. A massive boulder crashed down, blocking the tunnel and cutting him off from the others. "Minho!" Kyung called out, pressing against the wall of debris that now separated them. "Can you hear us?" A weak voice came from the other side. "I am alive, but I cannot move the rocks." The other workers gathered around the collapse, their faces grim. Cave-ins were common in the poorly supported tunnels, and rescue attempts often resulted in more casualties. "We need to get the Valari engineers," someone said. "They have the equipment to move these boulders safely." "That will take hours," Tay replied, studying the pile of rock. "He might not have that long." While the others debated their options, Hannah quietly approached the debris. She placed her bare hands against the largest boulder, feeling the heat that the stone had absorbed. From the tunnel air throughout the day, for a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the rock began to crack. Tiny fractures appeared where her palms touched the surface, spreading outward like a spider web. The boulder shifted slightly, creating a small gap. "Did you see that?" Kyung whispered to Tay. "See." "What?" Tay replied, but his eyes were fixed on Hannah's hands. The cracks spread further, and the boulder split into several smaller pieces that the workers could move by hand. Within minutes, they had cleared enough debris to pull Minho to safety. "How did that happen?" Minho asked, looking back at the cracked stone with wonder. "Old rock," Tay said quickly. "The heat makes it brittle." "Good thinking to try that spot, Hannah." Hannah said nothing. She pulled her gloves back on and picked up her pickaxe as if nothing unusual had occurred. But Kyung noticed that her hands were completely unmarked by the rough stone, and the metal tool she held seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim tunnel light dot as the work shift finally ended, and the humans climbed toward the surface. None of them spoke about what they had witnessed, but each of them carried the memory of impossible cracks spreading through solid rock at the touch of a woman who never seemed to feel the killing heat of Kethra's depths above ground. Commander Thex reviewed the day's production reports with growing irritation. The humans were becoming less efficient, and the Empire demanded results. Perhaps it was time to implement harsher measures. He did not yet know that in the tunnels below, something far more significant than mining quotas was stirring. The desert planet that was meant to break human spirits was instead forging them into something new, something the Valari Empire had never encountered before. And at the center of this transformation was a quiet woman who thought she was hiding a terrible secret, not knowing that she was about to become humanity's greatest hope. 3 weeks had passed since the cave-in, and strange things were happening in the mining facility. Workers whispered about them during their brief rest periods, sharing stories that made no sense but could not be ignored. June was the first to start keeping notes. He was a careful man who had worked as an engineer before the Valari captured his colony ship. Now he spent his days maintaining the ancient drilling equipment that the aliens forced humans to use. But June still thought like an engineer, and engineers notice patterns. The cooling system in Tunnel 7 has been running 30% more efficiently this week, he told his assistant Day during their morning equipment check. The temperature readings do not match what they should be. Day shrugged and continued lubricating the drill parts. Maybe the system is finally working properly for once. No, June said, pulling out a small notebook he kept hidden in his tool. Kit, I've been recording the numbers for 3 years. This is not normal. Something is absorbing the excess heat. He flipped through pages of carefully written measurements, temperatures, and observations. Every entry pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The areas where Hannah worked stayed cooler than they should. In Tunnel 7 that morning, Hannah worked alongside her brother Kyung and a new arrival named Sumi. The young woman had been on Kethera for only 2 weeks, and the brutal conditions were taking their toll. Her hands were covered in blisters from the hot metal tools, and she moved slowly to avoid the crushing headaches that came with heat exhaustion. "Here," Hannah said quietly, offering Sumi her water ration. "You need this more than I do." "I cannot take your water," Sumi protested weakly. "You have been working just as long as me." But Hannah insisted, and when Sumi finally accepted the container, she was surprised to find the water was cool and refreshing despite sitting in the burning tunnels for hours. Most water became undrinkably warm within minutes of entering the underground chambers. Kyung watched this exchange with growing concern. His sister was being too generous, too helpful. The Villari punished workers who drew attention to themselves, and Hannah's kindness was starting to be noticed. "Sister," he said during their midday break, "you must be more careful. People are beginning to talk." "Talk about what?" Hannah asked, though her eyes showed she knew exactly what he meant. "About how you never seem tired. About how the air feels cooler when you are around. About how your tools never seem too hot to handle." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I do not know what you mean." But Kyung could see the fear in her eyes, and he knew she was lying above ground. Commander Thex reviewed reports in his climate-controlled office. The mining operation was becoming more efficient in certain areas, which should have pleased him. Instead, it made him suspicious. Humans were not supposed to adapt this well to Kethra's conditions. "Lieutenant Voss," he called to his second-in-command, "have you noticed any unusual behavior among the workers recently?" Voss entered the office and stood at attention. "There have been some minor improvements in productivity, sir, particularly in the deeper tunnels." "Improvements?" Vex's scaled features twisted into a frown. "Humans do not improve under stress, they break down. That is why they are useful for this work." "Perhaps we have simply found more resilient specimens," Voss suggested. "Or perhaps something else is happening," Vex replied. "Increased surveillance in the tunnels. I want detailed reports on every worker, especially any who seem to be performing beyond normal human limits." That afternoon brought new hardships. Commander Vex announced that food rations would be reduced by 20% and rest periods cut in half. Several colonies on other worlds had failed to meet their quotas, and all human workers would share the punishment. "The Empire expects results," Vex announced over the facility's communication system. "Those who cannot adapt will be removed from the program permanently." Everyone knew what that meant. Removal from the program meant death. The new restrictions hit the workers hard. Within days, several of the older miners collapsed from exhaustion. The reduced food and water made the heat even more unbearable, and tempers began to flare as desperation set in. Borum was among the worst affected. The 60-year-old engineer had become a father figure to many of the younger workers, sharing stories of Earth and keeping spirits up during the darkest times. But his age and the harsh conditions were finally catching up with him. "He is burning up," Kyung said, kneeling beside Borum's bunk in the workers' quarters. The old man's skin was hot to the touch, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. "We need to get him to the medical bay," Tay said, but they all knew it was useless. The Villari medical facility only treated injuries that prevented workers from performing their duties. Illness from heat exhaustion was considered a sign of weakness. Several workers gathered around Borum's bed, but there was little they could do. The medical supplies they were allowed were basic at best, and nothing they had could treat severe heat stroke. "He will not last the night," someone whispered. Hannah stood at the edge of the group, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She watched Borum struggling to breathe and felt something building inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. As the other workers gradually gave up hope and returned to their bunks, Hannah remained. She waited until the Quarters were quiet and everyone seemed to be sleeping. Then she approached Borum's bed. The old man's face was flushed with fever, and sweat poured from his skin despite his body's attempts to cool itself. Hana had seen this condition before. Without intervention, he would be dead by morning. She looked around one more time to make sure no one was watching. Then she reached out and placed her hands gently on Borum's forehead. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly a soft glow began to emanate from her palms. It was not bright enough to light the room, but it was unmistakably there. Thin streams of what looked like golden fire danced across her fingers, but they gave off no heat. Instead, the flames seemed to draw heat away from Borum's fevered skin. The dangerous warmth that was killing him flowed into Hannah's hands and disappeared. As if she was absorbing it directly into her body, Borum's breathing began to slow and deepen. The flush faded from his cheeks, and his muscles relaxed as the fever broke. Within minutes, he was sleeping peacefully instead of fighting for his life. But when Hannah pulled her hands away, she found that she was not alone. Borum's eyes were open, and he was staring at her with a mixture of wonder and understanding. He had felt the heat leaving his body, had seen the impossible flames dancing across her skin. "Child," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "What are you?" Hannah's eyes filled with panic. She had been so focused on saving Borum that she had not considered the consequences of revealing her secret. Now, the one person she most respected among the workers had seen everything. "Please," she whispered back, "do not tell anyone." "They will kill me if they know." Borum struggled to sit up, his strength already returning as his body recovered from the heat stroke. "Kill you? Child, do you understand what you just did? You saved my life with powers I have never seen before." "I am dangerous," Hannah said, tears running down her cheeks. "I have always been different. If the Villari find out, they will use me as a weapon or destroy me to prevent others from learning what I can do." Borum reached out and took her hands in his weathered ones. They were still warm from the energy she had absorbed, but not burning. "You are not dangerous, Hannah. You are a gift. But you are right to be careful. The Villari fear anything they cannot control." "You will not tell anyone?" she asked. "I will. Keep your secret," Borum promised. "But Hannah, you cannot hide this forever. Others are starting to notice the signs. That young man June has been asking questions about temperature readings. Your brother suspects something. Sooner or later, you will have to decide whether to trust someone else." "I cannot risk it," Hannah said. "Too many people depend on the work here. If the Villari decide we are a threat, they will shut down the colony and send everyone to the labor camps on the prison worlds." Borum nodded slowly. He had heard the stories about those camps. No one ever returned from them. "Then we must be very careful," he said. "But Hannah, I want you to know something. In all my years, I have never seen anything as beautiful as what you just did. You took death away from an old man with nothing but the touch of your hands. That is not something to be ashamed of." As Hannah quietly returned to her own bunk, she carried Borum's words with her. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her power and called it beautiful instead of frightening, but she also carried a new fear. If Borum had noticed, and June was asking questions, how long could she keep her secret? And what would happen to all of them when the truth finally came out? In his office above ground, Commander Thex reviewed the daily health reports. Surprisingly, there had been no deaths from heat exhaustion despite the reduced rations. In fact, several workers who had been reported as critically ill were showing remarkable recoveries. This was not normal human behavior, and Commander Thex was beginning to suspect that the humans on Kethra were hiding something from their Villari overseers. It was time to dig deeper. Borum found Hannah working alone in the deepest part of Tunnel 9, where the heat was so intense that most workers could only manage 30-minute shifts. She had been there for 3 hours, her pickaxe moving in steady rhythm as she carved precious crystals from the burning rock. "We need to talk," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were alone. Hannah stopped working but did not turn around. "There's nothing to talk about. You were sick, now you are better, that is all. Child, I am not a fool. Borom said, moving closer. I felt what you did to me. I saw the flames in your hands. You cannot pretend it was a dream or a fever hallucination. Slowly, Hannah set down her tool and turned to face him. In the dim tunnel light, her eyes looked tired and afraid. What do you want me to say? That I am some kind of monster? That I have been lying to everyone for 7 years? I want you to tell me the truth, Borom said gently. How long have you been able to do this? Hannah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her gloved hands. Finally, she pulled off the protective covering and held up her bare palms. Even in the scorching tunnel, her skin looked normal and unburned. Always, she whispered. Ever since I was a child, heat has never hurt me. But it was not until we came to Kethra that I learned I could do more than just resist it. What can you do? Borom asked. Instead of answering with words, Hannah reached out and touched the tunnel wall. The rock was hot enough to blister normal skin, but under her touch, it began to cool. Frost actually formed where her fingers made contact with the stone. I can take heat from things, she explained. Draw it into myself and then release it somewhere else. The burning air in these tunnels, the hot metal tools, even the fever that was killing you, I absorb it all. Borom watched in amazement as she demonstrated pulling heat from a scalding piece of equipment until it was comfortable to touch. This is incredible, Hannah. Do you understand what this means? You could save lives, make the work bearable for everyone. No, Hannah said sharply, pulling her hands back. That is exactly what cannot happen. If the Villari learn about this, they will either kill me or turn me into a weapon. They will study me, experiment on me, maybe try to create more like me. But the other workers will die if I reveal myself, Hannah interrupted. The Villari do not tolerate surprises. If they think humans are hiding abilities from them, they will shut down this entire operation and send everyone to the death camps. Borom felt a chill that had nothing to do with Hannah's power. She was right, of course. The Villari Empire had a simple policy regarding unexpected developments. Among their slave species, eliminate the threat completely. How many people know? He asked. Just you, Hannah said. Though I think Kyung suspects something. And that engineer June has been watching me carefully. He keeps notes about temperature readings in the tunnels where I work. June is a good man, Borom said thoughtfully. He might be trustworthy. Or he might report his suspicions to save his own life, Hannah replied. I cannot take that risk. Their conversation was interrupted by voices approaching through the tunnel. Hannah quickly put her gloves back on and picked up her pickaxe as Kyung and Tae appeared around a corner. There you are, Kyung said, relief evident in his voice. When you did not come back with the others, I got worried. Just finishing my quota, Hannah replied casually, but Tae was looking around the tunnel with confusion. How is it so cool down here? This section is usually unbearable. The ventilation system must be working better today, Borom said quickly. Sometimes the air currents change. Tae did not look convinced, but he said nothing more. As they walked back toward the main shaft together, Borom caught Hannah's eye and nodded slightly. Her secret was safe with him. Over the next few days, Borom began to understand the full extent of what Hannah had been doing. She was not just protecting herself from the heat. She was unconsciously shielding everyone around her. The cooling effect followed her through the tunnels like an invisible bubble of relief. When young Sumi nearly collapsed from heat exhaustion, Hannah quietly moved to work beside her. Within an hour, Sumi had recovered enough to continue. When the drilling equipment overheated and threatened to shut down production, Hannah volunteered to help with maintenance, and somehow the machines ran cooler than they had in months. She is saving us all, Borom realized, and she does not even know the full extent of it. But keeping such a significant secret was becoming more difficult. June's temperature readings were showing impossible patterns, and other workers were starting to notice the strange coincidences that followed Hannah around. The crisis came when 15-year-old Sumi suffered a terrible accident. She was helping to move a container of molten crystal extract when the anti-gravity lift malfunctioned. The container crashed to the ground, splashing the burning liquid across her arms and chest. Her screams echoed through the tunnel as the superheated material ate through her work clothes and began cooking her flesh. "Get her to medical!" Tay shouted, but everyone knew it was too late. Burns from molten crystal extract were always fatal. The Villari medical bay would not even treat such severe injuries in a human worker. Sumi writhed on the tunnel floor, her skin blistering and blackening as the crystal extract continued to burn. Other workers tried to help, but there was nothing they could do except watch her die in agony. Hannah stood frozen for a moment, watching the young woman who had become like a little sister to her. Sumi was dying and no one could save her. Number 1, except someone who could absorb heat and flames directly into their own body. Everyone step back, Hannah said quietly. Hannah, no, Kyung said, suddenly understanding what she was thinking. There are too many people here, they will see. She's going to die, Hannah replied, kneeling beside Sumi. I cannot let that happen. Before anyone could stop her, Hannah placed her bare hands directly on Sumi's burning wounds. The molten crystal extract was hot enough to melt metal, but Hannah did not pull away as it seared against her palms. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The burning material began to cool under her touch, the deadly heat flowing out of Sumi's body and into Hannah's. Steam rose from her hands as she absorbed temperature. That would have killed anyone else instantly. The workers watching could not believe what they were seeing. Where moments before there had been horrible burns and charred flesh, Sumi's skin was becoming pink and healthy again. The crystal extract cooled to harmless chunks that could be brushed away. Within minutes, Sumi was sitting up, completely healed. Her work clothes were destroyed, but her body showed no sign of ever being injured. How is this possible? Minho whispered, staring at Hannah with wide eyes. The tunnel fell silent except for the sound of breathing and the distant hum of machinery. Everyone was looking at Hannah, waiting for an explanation that could make sense of the impossible thing they had just witnessed. Hannah looked around at the faces surrounding her. Kyung, Tae, Minho, Jun, and half a dozen other workers. All of them had seen her powers clearly displayed. There was no hiding anymore, no pretending it had been a lucky accident. Please, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Do not. Tell the Villari. They will kill all of us if they know. Borum stepped forward and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. We need to talk, he said to the group. All of us, but not here and not now. Too many eyes and ears in these tunnels. Tae nodded slowly, still staring at Sumi's completely healed arms. Tonight, after the shift ends. The old storage room in Section C, we figure this out together. As the workers slowly dispersed, pretending to return to normal duties, each of them carried the same thought. Everything they believed about human limitations had just been proven wrong. And if Hannah could do the impossible, what else might be possible for their species? But they also carried a terrible fear. The Villari controlled their world through overwhelming force and constant surveillance. If the aliens discovered that humans were capable of abilities beyond their understanding, the consequences would be swift and deadly. Above ground, Lieutenant Voss reviewed the daily incident reports. There had been a serious accident in Tunnel 9 involving molten crystal extract, but strangely, no medical treatment had been requested. The supervisor reported that the injured worker had recovered quickly and returned to duty. This was the third impossible recovery in 2 weeks. Voss made a note to increase surveillance in the deeper tunnels. Something was happening among the human workers, and the Villari Empire did not tolerate mysteries. In a few hours, when the work shift ended, a small group of humans would gather in secret to discuss the future of their species. They did not yet know that their decision would echo across the galaxy and change the relationship between humans and aliens forever. But for now, Hannah simply picked up her tools and returned to work, trying to ignore the weight of all those eyes watching her and wondering what other secrets lay hidden in the depths of Kethra's burning tunnels. The secret meeting in the old storage room lasted until the early hours of morning. 12 workers sat in a circle on the dusty floor, their voices barely above whispers as they discussed what they had witnessed. I still cannot believe it, Minho Saad, shaking his head. Sumi should be dead. We all saw the burns. Sumi herself sat quietly in the corner, running her hands over arms that showed no trace of injury. I felt myself dying, she said softly. The pain was so terrible I wanted it to end. Then Hannah touched me, and it was like cool water flowing through my body. June had brought his notebook and was asking careful questions. How long have you been able to do this, Hannah? Have your abilities changed over time? Hannah looked uncomfortable. With all the attention. It started small when I was a child on Earth. I could touch hot stoves without getting burned. My parents thought I just had thick skin. But here on Kethra, in this heat, it has grown stronger. The extreme conditions, Borum said thoughtfully. They are forcing you to evolve, not just me, Hannah said quietly. I think it is happening to all of us. Have you not noticed? We survive things that should kill humans. We work in heat that would have been impossible on Earth. We are all changing. Tay leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe I'm not the only one with abilities. Maybe the Velari have created something they did not expect when they forced humans to live in these conditions. The group fell silent as they considered this possibility. Could it be that their species was adapting in ways beyond normal evolution? Either way, Kyung said, we have a bigger problem. The Velari are getting suspicious. My sister cannot keep this secret much longer. As if summoned by his words, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridors outside their hiding place. Everyone froze as Velari voices drew closer. Thermal scanning equipment arrives tomorrow, Lieutenant Voss was saying to someone. Commander Thex wants every human worker tested. We will find whatever they are hiding. The footsteps passed by their room, but the message was clear. Time was running out. The next morning brought new horrors to the mining facility. Velari technicians arrived with strange machines that could measure body heat and detect thermal abnormalities. Commander Thex announced that all workers would undergo mandatory testing. Recent improvements in productivity have raised questions, Thex explained over the communication system. The Empire requires verification that all workers are operating within normal human parameters. Hannah knew she was trapped. The thermal scanners would immediately detect her unusual heat signature. There was no way to hide what she was from such advanced technology. We need to get you away from here, Kyung said as they stood in line waiting for testing. Maybe you can escape into the desert and leave all of you to face their anger? Hannah shook her head. No, if they discover what I am, at least I can try to convince them that I am alone. But fate had other plans. When Hannah stepped up to the scanning machine, alarms immediately began blaring. The Velari technician stared at his readings in confusion. Impossible, he muttered. According to this, her core body temperature is 15 degrees lower than it should be, but her hands are showing massive thermal energy buildup. Commander. Thex pushed through the crowd of workers to see the readings for himself. His scaled features showed a mixture of fascination and rage as he studied the impossible data. Bring her to the interrogation chamber, he ordered. Now. As the Velari guard seized Hannah's arms, she felt her emotional control slipping. Fear and anger made her powers harder to manage, and the air around her began to shimmer with heat distortion. Stay. Calm, Borum called out. But it was too late. The metal restraints on Hannah's wrists began to glow red-hot as her power surged out of control. The guards released her with shouts of pain as their armor became too hot to touch. Fascinating, Commander Thex said, his voice filled with cold interest. A human who can manipulate thermal energy. The Empire scientists will be very interested in studying you. I am not going anywhere with you, Hannah said. Her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The testing facility erupted into pandemonium as more alarms sounded. The thermal scanning equipment overloaded and caught fire as Hannah's uncontrolled power interfered with its circuits. In the confusion, several workers tried to reach Hannah, but Velari soldiers formed a defensive line. Weapons were drawn and the situation balanced on the edge of violence. You will come with us peacefully, Commander Thex said, or we will execute every human in this facility as punishment for hiding this deception. Hannah felt the weight of every life in the colony pressing down on her. She could fight, could use her powers to protect herself, but innocent people would die because of her resistance. "I will come," she said quietly. "But I want your word that no one else will be punished." "You are in no position to make demands," Dex replied. But he nodded to his soldiers, who began preparing transport restraints designed for dangerous prisoners. As they loaded Hana into the armored transport vehicle, she caught sight of her brother's face in the crowd. Kyung looked desperate, and she could see him whispering urgently to Tae and the others. The transport began moving toward the spaceport where a Valari ship waited to take her off-world. Through the small window, Hana watched the mining facility. Growing smaller in the distance, she had protected her friends and fellow workers, but at the cost of her own freedom. Soon she would be in a laboratory on some distant planet, subjected to experiments that would unlock the secrets of human thermal manipulation. But as the vehicle rumbled across the desert sand, explosions suddenly rocked the facility behind them. Bright flashes lit up the sky as critical systems began failing throughout the mining complex. The driver slammed on the brakes as his communication system crackled with panicked voices. "Commander, we have multiple system failures. The humans have sabotaged the power grid." Through the chaos of radio chatter, one voice came through clearly. It was Borum, speaking on a frequency that should have been secure. "This is for Hannah," the old engineer said. "And for everyone who thought humans were weak." Hannah smiled despite her situation. Her friends had not abandoned her after all. But she also felt a growing warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with her powers. It was something she had never experienced before, the fire of righteous anger. The Valari had made a mistake. They thought they could take her away and continue oppressing her people. They were about to learn that some humans were more dangerous. When cornered than they ever imagined. As explosions continued to light up the desert night, Hannah began to test the strength of her restraints. It was time to show the Valari Empire what happened when they pushed humanity too far. The transport vehicle rocked from a nearby explosion, and in that moment of chaos, Hannah felt her powers surge stronger than ever before. The metal restraints began to smoke and glow as she poured heat into them. Soon, she would be free. And then the real demonstration would begin. The restraints around Hannah's wrists melted away like ice in a furnace. She flexed her fingers as molten metal dripped harmlessly from her hands, the superheated material unable to burn skin that had absorbed the fires of a desert planet for 7 years. The transport vehicle lurched to a stop as more explosions rocked the mining facility in the distance. Through the small windows, Hannah could see bright flames rising from multiple buildings as Borum's sabotage plan unfolded. "Get back!" the Valari driver shouted as he saw her standing free in the passenger compartment. He reached for his weapon. But Hannah was faster. She placed her palm against the energy rifle, and within seconds the weapon became too hot for the alien to hold. He dropped it with a cry of pain, his scaled hands smoking from the brief contact. "I do not want to hurt you," Hannah said calmly, "but I will not let you take me away from my people." The rear doors of the transport exploded outward as she superheated the locking mechanism. Sand and hot desert air rushed into the vehicle as Hannah stepped out into the night. Above her, the twin moons of Kethra cast silver light across the desert, but their pale glow was overwhelmed by the orange flames rising from the mining complex. She could hear weapons fire and shouts in multiple languages as humans and Valari clashed for the first time. "There she is." Lieutenant Voss's voice carried across the sand as a squad of soldiers spotted her. "Do not let her escape!" Energy blasts scorched the ground around Hannah's feet as she ran toward the chaos of the facility. But instead of trying to avoid the deadly beams, she did something that shocked even herself. She reached out with her power and began absorbing the heat from the energy weapons themselves. The charged particles that made up the beams lost their thermal energy and dissipated harmlessly into the air. "Impossible!" Voss screamed. "She is neutralizing our weapons!" Hannah felt the absorbed energy building inside her like a star waiting to be born. Every shot the Valari fired at her made her stronger, more dangerous. She was no longer the quiet worker who hid her abilities in fear. At the mining facility, the battle was not going well for the humans. Despite their courage and Borum's carefully planned sabotage, they were outnumbered and outgunned. Kyung crouched behind an overturned mining cart, trying to tend to Minho's wounded shoulder. "We cannot hold them much longer," Tae called out from his position near the main entrance. "They have too many soldiers. We just need to buy time for Hana to get away," Borum replied, though his voice carried doubt. Could one person, even one with incredible powers, escape from an entire Villari garrison? The answer came in the form of a light brighter than both suns combined. Hana appeared at the edge of the facility grounds, but she was transformed. Heat distortion waves surrounded her like visible aura, and her eyes glowed with the intensity of molten metal. All the thermal energy she had absorbed from weapons fire, vehicle engines, and the burning buildings around her was ready to be released. "Commander Thex," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. "You wanted to study human capabilities. Let me show you what we can really do." She raised her hands toward the sky, and streams of pure thermal energy erupted from her palms. Not flames exactly, but something far more fundamental, concentrated heat made visible, rising like pillars of light into the darkness. The display was so spectacular that both sides stopped fighting to stare. Energy that could have melted steel or boiled water instantly danced harmlessly above Hana's head, completely under her control. "Impossible," Commander Thex whispered from his command position. "No biological creature should be able to manipulate energy on that scale," but Hana was just getting started. She began walking forward, and with each step she released more of her stored power into the ground beneath her feet. The sand turned to glass, creating a trail of crystalline beauty that reflected her light like a mirror. Villari soldiers tried to stop her advance, but their weapons were useless. Every energy blast they fired was absorbed and added to her growing power. Physical projectiles melted before they could reach her. "Fall back," Voss ordered his troops. "Maintain distance and call for orbital support." "No," Commander Thex countermanded. "If we bombard the facility from space, we lose everything we came here to capture. This human is the key to understanding their species' potential." Hana heard their discussion through her enhanced senses. The thermal energy flowing through her body was affecting more than just her ability to manipulate heat. She could feel electromagnetic fields, sense the heat signatures of every living thing around her, even detect the energy patterns of Villari technology. "You want to understand human potential?" she called out to Commander Thex. "Then understand this. You have been treating us like animals when we are becoming something far beyond what you can imagine." She placed both hands flat against the desert sand and released a controlled burst of her power directly into the ground. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A column of superheated air rose from the sand like an invisible tornado, creating massive updrafts that could be felt kilometers away. The pressure differential caused winds to whip across the facility, and clouds began forming in the previously clear sky. "She is creating weather patterns," June observed in amazement from his hiding place. "Actually controlling the climate around." U.S. The wind and sudden humidity changes were affecting the Villari soldiers badly. Their equipment was designed for the stable, dry conditions of Kethra's desert, not the localized storm that Hana was generating, but more importantly, her display was being seen far beyond the mining facility. Other human colonies across the planet watched the pillar of light rising into the sky and understood that something fundamental had changed. In facilities hundreds of kilometers away, other workers were laying down their tools and looking at their Villari overseers with new eyes. If one human could do the impossible, what could all of them accomplish together? Hana sensed the shift in the planetary consciousness, the moment when an entire species decided it would no longer accept subjugation. She had become more than just a person with unusual abilities. She was a symbol of human potential awakening. "This ends now," she announced, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the facility despite the wind and chaos around her. "No more quotas, no more reduced rations, no more treating humans like disposable equipment." Commander Thex stepped forward, his weapon trained on the human workers who had taken cover behind mining equipment. Surrender now, or I will execute every human in this facility, starting with your brother. Hannah's glowing eyes fixed on the Valari commander, and for the first time since her power had awakened, she felt truly angry. The thermal energy around her intensified until the very air began to shimmer. You misunderstand the situation, she said quietly. You are not in control here anymore. She gestured toward the Valari weapons and every energy rifle in the facility, overloaded simultaneously. Soldiers dropped their useless equipment as the power cells became too hot to handle safely. How? Vex demanded, staring at his smoking weapon. Because thermal energy powers everything you use, Hannah explained. Your weapons, your vehicles, your life support systems, and I can control all of it. As if to demonstrate her point, she reached out with her power toward the Valari command vehicle. Its engine died instantly as she absorbed all the heat from its power core. Emergency lights flickered and failed as she drained energy from its electrical systems. In the sudden quiet that followed, with Valari technology neutralized and human workers standing free, a new sound could be heard across the desert. It was the sound of other facilities, other colonies, rising up in coordinated rebellion as they saw Hannah's signal blazing in the sky. The age of human subjugation on Kethra was ending, and it was ending in fire. Hannah stood in the center of what had once been a battlefield, but now resembled something from an ancient legend. The sand around her feet had transformed into sheets of colored glass that caught and reflected the thermal energy still dancing around her body. Where her power touched the ground, the desert itself was being reborn. The pillar of light rising from her position could be seen from orbit, a beacon that announced to the galaxy that humanity would no longer hide its true potential. Across Kethra, similar lights were beginning to appear as other humans in distant colonies awakened abilities they never knew they possessed. Commander Thex stood frozen, his scaled features reflecting the impossible sight before him. All around the facility, his soldiers had dropped their useless weapons and were backing away from the glowing human who had just neutralized their entire technological advantage with a gesture. This is not possible, he whispered. Your species is primitive. You are supposed to be laborers, nothing more. You made us into something more, Hannah replied, her voice carrying clearly across the transformed landscape. 7 years of forcing humans to survive in conditions that should have killed us. Did you think there would be no consequences? She raised her hands again, and this time the display was even more spectacular. Instead of raw energy, she began weaving heat and light into complex patterns that danced through the air like living artwork. Streams of thermal energy spiraled upward, creating intricate designs that pulsed with controlled power. Look around you, she continued. Every human facility on this planet is rising up tonight. We are not the same species you conquered. We have evolved? As if summoned by her words, reports began flooding the Valari communication networks. Uprising after uprising was being reported from mining colonies, processing plants, and labor camps across the planet. But these were not desperate revolts doomed to failure. In the northern mining complex, a human named Jin had discovered he could manipulate electromagnetic fields, disabling Valari computers and communications with a touch. At the crystal processing facility, a woman called Nari was generating localized gravitational anomalies that made Valari weapons too heavy to lift. Impossible, Lieutenant Voss gasped, listening to the increasingly frantic reports. How can so many humans have developed abilities simultaneously? Because you underestimated what desperate people can become, Borom answered, stepping out from behind his cover now that the immediate danger had passed. When you push any species to the edge of extinction, evolution accelerates. You created the conditions for our transformation, Hannah nodded, her glowing eyes fixed on Commander Thex. Every human you forced to work in impossible heat, every family separated by your labor camps, every person who died because you saw us as disposable. You were forging us into something beyond your understanding. She began walking toward the Valari commander, and with each step, her power created new wonders. Flowers of crystallized sand bloomed in her footprints, and the very air around her shimmered with colors that had no names. What do you want? Dex demanded, though his voice had lost its commanding authority. Revenge, the destruction of the Empire? I want you to live, Hannah said simply, stopping just beyond arm's reach of the alien leader. I want you to return to your empire and tell them what you have seen here. Tell them that humanity is no longer the weak species they conquered. We are something new. She gestured toward the transformed landscape around them, where glass sculptures, created by her power, caught and reflected the light of distant explosions as other facilities fell to human rebels. Tell them that we do not seek to conquer or destroy, but we will no longer accept subjugation. Any attempt to reimpose the old system will be met with abilities you cannot counter. Commander Dex stared at the impossible scene surrounding him. His entire worldview, everything the Velari Empire believed about the natural order of species in the galaxy, was crumbling before his eyes. The Empire will never accept this, he said weakly. They will send fleets, armies. They will destroy this entire planet before allowing humans to challenge their authority. Let them try, Kyung said, moving to stand beside his sister. Around him, other human workers were emerging from cover, no longer cowering in fear, but standing proud despite their years of oppression. Hannah smiled and placed her hand on her brother's shoulder. As she did, something remarkable happened. The thermal energy surrounding her began to flow into Kyung, and his eyes took on a faint glow. The awakening is not limited to one person, she explained as Kyung stared at his hands in wonder. Once the barriers are broken, once humans understand what we can become, the abilities spread. We are all connected, all part of the same evolutionary leap. Across the facility, other workers were beginning to show signs of change. Tay discovered he could sense heat signatures through solid walls. June found that electronic devices responded to his thoughts. Even young Sumi was generating small sparks of electrical energy between her fingers. This is the future, Hannah announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the transformed mining complex. Not conquest or revenge, but partnership. The Velari Empire can join us in exploring what sentient species can become when they work together, or they can cling to the old ways and be left behind. She turned back to Commander Dex, and the thermal energy around her began to settle into a stable, controlled aura. You have a choice to make. Will you be the leader who helped create a new age of cooperation, or will you be remembered as the one who could not adapt to change? Dex looked around at his demoralized soldiers, at the impossible displays of power surrounding him, at the reports still pouring in from across the planet. Every certainty he had held about the natural order was being rewritten before his eyes. What are your terms? He asked finally. Freedom for all human workers, Borom answered, stepping forward as the unofficial spokesman for the colony. Recognition of humanity as an equal species, not a subject race. And compensation for the years of forced labor and suffering. The Empire will never accept such terms, Dex protested. Then the Empire will face the consequences, Hannah said calmly. She gestured toward the sky, where the lights of other awakening colonies could be seen even through the day's growing brightness. This is happening on every world where humans have been forced to work in extreme conditions. Your scientists were so focused on what we could endure that they never considered what we might become. As dawn broke over the transformed desert, casting new light across the crystalline sculptures and impossible gardens that Hannah's power had created, a new chapter in galactic history was beginning. Ships were already departing from Kethera, carrying news of the awakening to human colonies across the galaxy. On worlds where humans had been forced to adapt to crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, or radiation-soaked environments, similar transformations were beginning. Commander Dex watched his transport prepare for departure, knowing he carried perhaps the most important message in Velari history. The species they had dismissed as weak laborers had evolved into something unprecedented, beings who could manipulate the fundamental forces of physics through will alone. Tell your Empire one more thing, Hannah called as he boarded his ship. Tell them that the humans of Kethera bear no grudge against those who treated us fairly. Some Velari showed kindness even within an unjust system. This awakening is not about replacing one form of oppression with another. As the Valari ship lifted off, heading toward a galaxy that would never be the same, Hana stood surrounded by her fellow humans. They were no longer workers or prisoners or subjects. They were pioneers of a new form of existence, living proof that sentient life could transcend the limitations that others tried to impose upon it. In the growing light of dawn, the desert of Kethera bloomed with impossible beauty. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, humanity was awakening to its true potential at last. The age of subjugation was over. The age of cooperation was about to begin. And it had all started with a woman they thought was powerless, until her hands lit the desert ablaze.